Coloring Crypto.
Welcome to Coloring Crypto. I'm your host, Gabe Colors, and I started this podcast 2 or 3 months ago with the intention to just learn about the crypto, blockchain, cryptocurrency space, and it's been an incredible journey. Thanks for riding on this with me. And if you'd like to support us, it always helps to share with your friends on social media and leave us a review on iTunes and visit our sponsors by going to coloringcrypto.com/sponsors. Oh, and a review on iTunes is a really big deal. Thanks for your support. And today's episode is about the legality, mostly, of the initial coin offering space. This week, the SEC Chairman Clayton came out with a statement that, according to our guest today, really is just helping clarify and stabilize this new emerging technology, industry, asset class, as you will. So here's Amy Wan, the CEO of Bootstrap Legal. How are you doing today, Amy?
I'm good. Thanks so much for having me on the show.
So I'm really excited because there's, in the ICO world and the initial coin offering world, there's so many questions about how these are being treated by governments. And could you just start and give us kind of like a current status of, how is the government in the US structured to address this and sort of what's been going on lately?
So I keep hearing a lot of people online say, oh, the regulations are coming out, et cetera, et cetera. The truth is, they've already been out. They've been out for not just years, but decades, right? So, a lot of this all hails back to, the Securities Act from the 1930s. And then we have basically almost 100 years of case law to fall back on. So even though the technology is new, what I keep saying is it doesn't matter what form people are raising money in. What matters is how they're raising money, who they're raising it from, and how they're behaving, right? So, at least in the United States, we have, on a federal level, we have the SEC. The SEC primarily relies on the Howey test and all the case law that follows it. I will say that it's not enough to just, take the Coinbase DeVois paper from 2016 with that little, questionnaire chart and fill it out yourself and post it online and say, oh, we analyzed the Howey test on our own. Like, we're good. We're not a security. That's not enough. And I think that's especially apparent after Chairman Clayton's remarks. Instead, what you really should be doing is asking yourself, okay, like if I am going to do an ICO, whether it's utility token, security token, whatever you're calling it, how am I treating this? Am I selling this to hedge funds and VCs? Am I selling them to people who are hopefully trying to make a profit on it? Am I telling them they might make a profit on it, right? Or is it simply just I'm selling a prepaid service? If someone doesn't like it, they can get a refund. Almost like more of a Kickstarter campaign, or like I bought a widget, I don't like it, I want to return it, that sort of thing. So I really think that's the 800-pound gorilla in the room is, there's so many types of tokens out there nowadays. What really are these tokens funding, and how are they being used and treated?
Well, and I think it's interesting because, most tokens, even if they are a very good use case, they are a utility. Most ICOs are being launched with this assumed possibility for investor profit, and so a lot of times it seems like it's a messaging issue. And what I'm curious about is it looks like the SEC is really trying to peel back those layers, and are they trying to squash anything that is being treated as an investment despite the messaging, or are companies able to message this in a way that protects them?
So I don't think the SEC is actually trying to squash anything. I think they've actually been really understanding and have taken a lot of time and put a lot of resources towards trying to really understand the industry, right? I think what they're doing is merely enforcing the laws that have been around for, almost 100 years now, which is to the extent you're selling a security, make sure you follow the securities laws. That's it, right? If you aren't selling a security, doesn't matter. But if you are, then, we want to make sure that we are meeting our mandate, and they have a two-part mandate. One is capital formation, right? They're not trying to quash capital formation. They do actually, want people to raise money, but their other competing mandate is investor protection. And a lot of the securities laws, a lot of the reason why the SEC was even created was because of the Great Depression, the stock market crash in the late 1920s. And I think if you really analyze things, you will see that there are a lot of parallels between what's happening now and what had happened back then, right? And so they're trying to prevent grandma with her last Social Security paycheck from getting caught in this thing and losing everything they have and ending up on the street.
And you mentioned briefly a statement that came out from the SEC this week by the chairman, Jay Clayton. Can you describe what that was about?
Yeah, sure. So Chairman Clayton basically made an official statement. It wasn't necessarily on behalf of the commission or the other commissioners. It was just his statement. But really, he started to clarify a lot of things. So his statement talked about both cryptocurrency in general and ICOs and shortcoin offerings, token sales, whatever you want to call them. It doesn't actually matter what you call them, right? But I think the two most important takeaways from that statement was, one, he clarified, and you also saw not an enforcement action, but another enforcement case come out yesterday that illustrates this, that even if your token has a utility, it doesn't mean it's not a security. You can have a security token that has some utility features, right? So that, I think, is very important to understand, because a lot of the times on social media or in these conferences, I'll have people come up to talk to me and they fight and say, no, we're selling a utility token. And I was like, well, just because it's a utility doesn't mean it's not a security. The second part that is really important is that he really emphasized that you have to look at the facts and circumstances of the case, which is, consistent with what they've been saying for the past couple months. And in particular, he emphasized that, look, it matters how you're marketing this, right? If you are going out and saying, hey, you're going to profit off of this, or hey, buy these tokens as an investment, or hey, we're going to be trading on an exchange and you'll be able to, have liquidity and go ahead and make a quick investment, make a quick buck. All of those things point towards it being a security, because essentially what you're selling someone is the potential opportunity of investing in something and making a profit. And that's essentially what a security is.
So if I'm launching a token and anywhere in my white paper or promotion, I talk about how you can make money off of buying this token, that's the flag.
That's, I think, one of many flags, right? You have to look at a lot of different things. What it comes down to at the end of the day is not like, oh, you have to follow rule A or you have to follow rule B. It's, okay, if we actually looked at everything as a whole and took in everything together, are they really trying to pre-sell a widget, or are they trying to get people to invest in this thing and people are really buying it to possibly make a profit one day, right? Like the way it is messaged and structured and all of that stuff. And it even goes down to, I know a lot of these ICOs are approaching, crypto hedge funds, they're approaching VCs, approaching professional investors. If that's who you're selling to and you're selling hundreds of thousands of tokens at a time, that's investment. If I go out and, I don't know, maybe I go to Kickstarter today and I order, the world's most awesome future standing desk, I don't go and buy 100,000 of them, hoping to resell them on the market for a profit, right? Like, are you really buying something to use, or are people really buying this to make a buck? That's what it comes down to.
A lot of ICOs are offering, in fact, most that I see are offering this tiered buy-in program where, if you get in on the initial pre-ICO, you get a certain discount. The price is already locked in to be raised up at sort of the next tier. That would seem like it's blatantly advertising itself as a security. What are your thoughts on that?
So I don't think that's necessarily the case, because you could say, hey, I'm a startup, and the first 10 users I get, this is the eventual price it'll be, but I'm going to give you a 90% discount. And the next 10 people, I'll give you a 50% discount. The next 10 people, you buy it at full price, right? So that, like, having discounts in and of itself is not necessarily the issue. It's like, who are you approaching to buy this? Why are they buying it? How are you presenting it, right? So I think what you're talking about is what I see a lot today in the market, which is, hey, I'm going to approach this ICO whale, and I'm going to offer them maybe as high as an 80 or 90% discount. A lot of these whales will ask for almost instant liquidity, which, to the extent that you're doing a compliant offering, is actually not possible, right? There's generally a 12-month holding period, which for them, they think that's a really long time. But if you pair those things together, for example, that starts looking very suspect, right? Because not only are they getting super discounted tokens, but they can very quickly go and sell it on the market to the crowd. And actually, if you look at that situation as a whole, that's like your classic pump and dump scheme, right? I think a lot of the regular investors in these token sales, they will take cues from these whales or these crypto influencers, and they will follow along on whatever deals that these influencers have been a part of, because they take it as a cue of, oh, this is a good project. I'm basically going to back it because of this advisor or this first investor. But if that investor is taking their money off the table within a month, it really means nothing. It doesn't mean they have to believe in the project at all, right? So the whale takes their money out very quickly. The ICO has already earned the money through their ICO, so they're happy. Really, the folks who suffer are the crowd, right? Because they bought in at either, full price or whatever the price is that the whale dumped it at, and they're the ones who stand to lose the most at that point.
This morning, as we were prepping for this call, we exchanged emails, and you mentioned the SEC, the Chairman Clayton's comment, and then you mentioned a company, Munchie, and I got that email that we had Munchie on as a guest of our podcast in episode 7, and I haven't even had a chance to catch up on this announcement, but it looks like it's now public. The SEC has shut down the Munchie ICO. I don't know if you have read that article or have any comments on this recent event.
Yeah, so Munchie, they got shut down, I think 1 or 2 months ago, actually. It just took the SEC some extra time to actually come out and make the formal statement and make an example out of them. But, a lot of people have predicted that this would happen. Now, Munchie was a California-based company that went out and said, hey, we are doing an ICO. We are going to be selling utility tokens. We've, analyzed the Howey test, and these are not securities. And then one of the other representations that they made was, hey, we're going to be listed on an exchange. You might be able to make some money here. That, like I mentioned earlier, comports with Chairman Clayton and the SEC stance on, it's not what you say it is, AKA a utility token or not. It is, how are you representing this to people who are buying these things, right? And because they said, oh, we're going to be listed on an exchange, because they represented it as, hey, you might make some money here. That basically made it a security. They probably got a call or an email from the SEC, and it sounds like they have, agreed to stop their sale and to refund investors. But the SEC here is planting the flag right now. They are going out and clarifying, to the extent you said that you are doing a utility token sale, we're putting you on notice now that you still might be a security.
I'm looking at the article right now, and Munchie literally said, quote, as more users get on the platform, the more valuable your tokens will become, which clearly sort of, yes, that's that's sort of a obvious statement.
Yeah, yeah.
So, I really enjoyed a description I heard of you, I think, where you're sort of focused on this intersection of technology and the law. And aside from having, just kind of an insight on what's happening, with the SEC and tokens and everything, you've been at this for a little while. I'm just curious how you've seen this, it's such a fast moving industry. I'm curious how you've seen it change in the last couple of months or even in the last year.
Yeah, well, certainly a year ago, the industry was, at least the ICO industry was extremely nascent, right? But as of last December, the real big one that we had was the DAO, which, failed. And I think Mastercoin had been done by that time too. I can't remember. I would say, I started getting calls last fall from people who wanted to do their own DAO. And activity really started to pick up, early this year. By spring, the calls had become very regular. Um, but it was also really interesting because the calls that I was getting, which made me very cautious, and I think a lot of attorneys are very cautious about the space, is a lot of the calls that I was getting was from folks who wanted a quick way to raise money, but what they were actually giving investors was a raw deal. So, one example is, I have put together real estate funds for many years. One guy called me in spring and said, hey, I want to put together a real estate fund. I said, and it's an asset-backed ICO. And I said, okay, great. How much are you raising? He said $100 million. I was like, okay. And how much real estate have you acquired and operated in the past? He said, well, none. And I'm like, well, that's interesting because usually people start off with like flipping a house or something, And he didn't have any real estate experience. I asked him, okay, what are investors getting? What's the distribution? He said 80-20. And that's actually very standard in the real estate industry. Investors get 80, and the sponsor, the fund manager, the syndicator, depending on who they are, they'll get 20, right? And I was like, okay, great. So it's 80 to investors, 20 to you, right? He's like, no, it's 80 to me, 20 to investors. At that point, I was like, oh man, like this guy doesn't really know what he's doing. He's never operated real estate, and I don't know if investors are only getting 20, how they're ever going to get any of their principal back, right? So that a lot of the calls were like that, which I think automatically alerts the antenna of any securities attorneys, because we don't want to be representing scam artists, fraudulent people, things like that. We all have our malpractice insurances and reputations to worry about. Over the summer, obviously, ICOs really took off, and that's when you saw Tezos and Filecoin and all of those types of things. And I think probably starting the middle to end of summer, it became so big that you started to get a lot of skepticism, which is good, right? Because when you have a lot of hype, you don't want to just blindly follow. You do want to sit there and question, like, well, what is the basis of all of this? Who's real in this industry and who is not? And I do still generally believe that there are good ICOs. It's just that there's so many bad ones. And that's the same as the startup industry as well. It's just that right now, there's a lot in the ICO market that doesn't make sense, right? You have these people raising all this money upfront for the lifetime of their entire project. That doesn't make sense. You have people with just a concept trying to raise $100, $200 million. That doesn't make sense. You're seeing these advisory boards with these advisors that are literally on like 50 different ICOs. I mean, let's be honest, right? Like, if you're a good advisor, it's very difficult to advise that many companies. Like, you just don't have the time. So that's another red flag. And then I've even heard these advisors are asking for a percentage of the capital raised or a percentage of the token or, whatever. They're asking for things that they actually shouldn't be asking for. And really all it is people putting on their advisory board their name to advertise it as a signal, but not actually getting any substantive advice from that advisor. So that's very suspect as well. I think there's been a lot of suspect practices in the industry. The industry, I think in the past probably 90 days has, it's not that it's cool. There's certainly still a lot of ICOs and there's still a lot of money here, but I think people are starting to get smarter, right? They're saying, okay, we're not just evaluating team, we're not just evaluating advisory boards. Let's sit here, let's look at the market cap that these tokens are asking for. Let's look at their token economics and their governance and whether it works. Let's really dig into whether it makes sense for this project to even tokenize. So I do think people are getting smarter, people are getting more selective, but I still think it's going to take a while for the market to become more educated in all of those things. But I am very optimistic for the future.
And I know of some efforts like the ICO Governance Foundation and other bodies that are forming to try to sort of self-regulate or self-report on this industry. Have you seen any sort of third parties, or for folks that did buy into ICOs? How do they sort of check in and see if the money is being used in ways that they were told it would be?
So I know that there are a number of different folks out there trying to work on self-governance, self-regulatory issues, and to some extent, it's like, self-reporting on the blockchain, right? I think that's definitely a good initiative. And I think, self-policing is a good thing, although it doesn't mean that you are exempt from regulations. Another thing I am concerned about is, to the extent that someone self-reports, this is how we're spending funds, good data in is good data out, bad data in is bad data out, right? So if they are self-reporting, but those self-reports are fraudulent, then that's obviously not a great thing.
And there's still so much enthusiasm amongst the grassroots. I just moved from the Bay Area down to Los Angeles, and I met you at the meetup, and I remarked just how much sort of more openness and sort of grassroots enthusiasm I felt. Small sample size, my first time kind of coming down here. What are your thoughts on the Los Angeles cryptocurrency, or just crypto in general, blockchain community?
I mean, LA it's there. It's definitely still not as strong as some other crypto communities around the world, but, I would say the folks that we have here, they're pretty good, right? And I think you're right. It is a little bit more grassroots. I think over the summer I went to like a fintech week thing up in the Bay Area, and it was a little overwhelming because it was like, literally, like, it was like 90% of the pitches were all for these ICOs. Everyone up there is trying to ICO right now, but it doesn't necessarily make sense, right? Because in many cases, people are like, maybe they haven't necessarily been able to raise for their company the traditional way, so now they're trying to take their business model back end it onto the blockchain, whether that makes sense or not. And go the ICO route, which actually in the end, I think may complicate their business model and make them spend a lot more money.
Let's talk about what you're up to here. You've got Bootstrap Legal. Tell us about that.
Yeah, sure. So, I'm a securities attorney by training. I've worked in, for example, real estate crowdfunding and the crowdfunding space. And prior to that, I was actually working for the federal government on, regulatory affairs and international regulatory coherence and things like that. I got to a point last year where I thought, hey, I don't know that I could do this for the next 30 years. And however I do this, like, there's so much inefficiency. And quite honestly, like, I say I didn't go to law school to help rich people become richer. I went to help people that weren't necessarily rich improve their lives, right? And so I would get, for example, a lot of clients who would call and they wanted to raise money, but there was no way they could afford my services as a regular attorney. So I left my firm at the beginning of this year and basically set out to automate my old job. So the first product we pushed out was something that automated the drafting of small real estate private equity funds. And that's still there. It's sitting there. It's making money today, right? As the ICO scene heated up, I started looking into the ICO market as a potential another vertical to expand our software into, because especially after the SEC's Dell press release on July 27th, a lot of law firms really hiked up their prices for legal representation on an ICO by a lot. So I saw that opportunity there, ultimately concluded that it does not make sense to automate this type of documentation right now because there's so little standardization in the industry. And quite frankly, with all the regulatory clarity that I expect to come out, we'd probably have to recode these documents like 20 times in 2018. But instead, we basically stumbled across a much, I think, larger issue. It's really a systemic one that I don't think people are talking enough about. And I think it really affects the future of not just the ICO, but the entire blockchain industry. And that issue is basically this. Smart contracts are, one of those tools that power a lot of transactions in the blockchain space. And I see a lot of people out there who are saying, hey, like one day so much business will be done on the blockchain. The problem today, though, is that entering into a smart contract is basically like playing roulette. There is no transactional confidence because you actually have no idea what the outcome is going to be because there's so many things that can go wrong. Smart contracts today are actually very vulnerable, right? And if you, as a business, do not have confidence in the outcome of your transaction, why are you going to do business on the blockchain? And so what we're doing.
What are the specific ways that as you say, contracts are vulnerable? What are some examples of that?
Sure. So, for example, you might have coding errors, right? You can't say that the best attorney can sit there and write you a disputeless contract. And very similarly, I don't think the best coder can sit there and say, okay, every smart contract that I write for you is going to be errorless and disputeless. Like, that's just not going to happen. B, you've got a lot of security vulnerabilities. Human beings are the most creative species on the planet. Trust me, I've seen crazy things. Just look at the DAO, right? The DAO hack, where a hacker took off with $50-60 million worth of Ethereum. Their hack was a hack against the intent or the spirit of the DAO smart contract, but not necessarily the terms, right? They found a loophole. They found a vulnerability. And even over the summer, it was like every ICO that popped up on my social media, sorry, not every, but many ICOs that popped up on my social media, there would be a headline that would say, hey, in the first 15 minutes, this ICO got hacked for $2 to $3 million, and the founders are sitting there, and there's nothing that they can do. They're just shrugging their shoulders, right? And then the last thing is just that there will be instances in which parties will need to amend, modify, or terminate their smart contracts. People change, situations change. You can never know what's going to happen in the future. If you enter into a smart contract for someone to ship goods from Japan to Hawaii, but, the volcano in Hawaii blows up and there's no more Hawaii, how does the smart contract execute, right? And that's an extreme example, but there are a lot of examples of this every single day.
Right, it's coding in for the unforeseen future possibilities that just weren't thought of that may affect the ability for any smart contract to make a determination.
Exactly.
So if these are the issues, what are some solutions?
Yeah, so I'll tell you what our solution is. We're basically providing a safety net, right? So we are making an SDK that anyone can put into their smart contract and it sits there. And to the extent that the smart contract is executing in a way that the parties do not intend, the authorized parties can trigger that code. It will freeze execution of the smart contract, kick the entire thing into a dispute resolution marketplace. And I can explain in a second why it's a marketplace, not an actual service. And then for a lot of logistical and cultural reasons, the entire thing sits on a borderless digital jurisdiction because, a lot of smart contracts, they're done pseudonymously. You may not actually know the identity of the other party, right? So you can't even, for example, go and serve them a complaint and go to the traditional court process because you don't know who to serve, right? And if you don't serve them, the court won't take your dispute. So even if you can get across those logistical hurdles, I say have fun explaining to your counsel, judge, and jury. I'll assume think that Bitcoin is illegal or fraudulent or something like that. Have fun explaining your smart contract to them. Oh, by the way, they can't read it because it's in code and less than 1% of the population can read code. So now you have to go get an expert witness. There's just so many issues that we were like, okay, let's bring the dispute resolution process on chain and basically provide a freeze button and kill switch for those situations in which this is going to be necessary.
What's the business model?
So basically right now we are doing two things. We're selling individual licenses, mostly to ICOs that run on smart contracts that, want to be able to take advantage of our system just in case something happens with their ICO. And the second thing is for blockchain projects that are very smart contract intensive. So for example, supply chain projects or insurtech projects or things like that. We are working with, we're forming close partnerships with them to provide them enterprise licenses to our software.
What's the roadmap? How far along are you guys, and when would be the release?
Yeah, sure. So we're releasing it in several different stages. The first part is going to come out at the beginning of next year, and that is basically a smart contract notification system, right? Because part of the problem is identifying when a smart contract is going to go bad or going to execute in a way that the parties don't intend. So a lot of these ICOs that got hacked, some of them didn't find out until a lot later, right? So our smart contract notification system is one of the cornerstones of the overarching system that we're building. That's being released early next year. And basically the same way that banks and credit reporting companies and credit card companies will send you a text or email notifying you when there's unusual activity on your account, we will send you a text or email notifying you when there's unusual activity happening with your smart contract, aka funds are being drained from it.
What are for you the sort of biggest risks, or what are the hurdles that you're coming up on and anticipating to make this successful?
I think there's two things, and it's really kind of a chicken egg thing, right? One of the issues is, I am a little afraid that the ICO market may blow up next year. And if that happens, I feel like I don't think the industry is going to go away, but I do think it's going to be like a Mount Gox, right? I think the bad press is going to turn a lot of new users away, and it's going to make the industry kind of just like sit there a little bit more for several more years instead of being as vibrant an ecosystem as it could be. And secondly, I guess my big fear is that because of the many issues today around smart contracts, that smart contract adoption won't take off, right? So those are the big vulnerabilities of our business. But of course, that's a very chicken egg thing. I think if you can provide that sort of transactional confidence, the freeze button, the ability to resolve things using some level of human judgment, then people will feel a lot safer about transacting business on the blockchain and using smart contracts.
One of the questions that I've asked people on this podcast are, pulling back out, sort of above cryptocurrencies and thinking of like, this technology and the blockchain in general, I ask people, what are some of the future great things that could come to our society from this? And two of the most common examples, honestly, out of like a half dozen that were heard often were real estate, ownership of property, and the other is legal. And I'm curious, you've got your sort of hands on both of those. I'm curious just to kind of talk about those a little bit, but also, just your experience in the blockchain. What else do you see in terms of positive impacts for our world?
I would like to see, and I know some people are working on this already, but I want to see a decentralized internet where people actually own and control their information and can disperse or sell it as they please, as opposed to all these marketing companies going out, scraping our data, selling it to other companies.
Yeah, I mean, it's really amazing. I think we all have a sense that we're being tracked, but we don't really understand what that means. And I think most of us just feel helpless, using our Facebook and Twitter and all these, Google, all these tools are useful enough or addictive enough that we just sort of accept we're being watched, but we don't know the implications of that. What else do you see? What do you kind of anticipate? Like, what excites you? Over the next couple of months. Obviously, your company, Bootstrap Legal, and the sort of tiers of release with your products. What else do you see kind of happening that you're keeping your eye on?
Oh man, I'm really, and I think I do this out of pure personal intellectual curiosity, but I'm really keeping my eye on how the ICO market matures, not just for my company, but really because, as a securities attorney, as someone who's worked in structured finance, I see a lot today that I don't like, and I do want the industry to do well. So I'm really hoping that people start structuring their ICOs in different ways that are really more along the lines of best practices as opposed to let's take advantage of this situation and get a bunch of money.
I think a lot of people sort of hear legal and SEC and they just sort of it's kind of like learning about the tax plan. People kind of just sort of freeze or numb out, and it's great to have you on, kind of describing the nuances and the importance of this, because it sounds like like you said, the SEC is playing a positive, necessary role so that the industry is more trustable. People can have confidence in it. How do people reach you and find out more about what you're up to?
Yeah, sure. So it's very simple. Our website is bootstraplegal.com. Bootstrap Legal also has, social media accounts on all the major social media channels. They can also contact me. I'm on LinkedIn. I do a lot of updates on, ICOs on LinkedIn. I'm also on Twitter and in a lot of the crypto Facebook groups and Instagram, things like that. So, they just have to search for me.
Awesome. Well, Amy, it's so great to have you on. Thank you for connecting and keep me updated. And I hope to see you at some future LA meetups soon.
Yeah, definitely. You too.
Okay, thanks again.
Subscribe now. Subscribe now.